Hey, Al Scott here. If you're like me, you need coffee. Lots of it. And you probably prefer it tastes good, too. Well, let me tell you about Darren's Coffee Company at darrenscoffee.com. Darren Marion is a natural entrepreneur who decided to leave his corporate job and strike out on his own, making great coffee. And Darren's Coffee is now delivering right to your door. Darren gets his beans direct from farmers around the world. All specialty, premium grade with no filler. Hey, the man just wants everyone to have a chance to taste this great coffee. darrenscoffee.com. Use promo code Scott and you get free shipping. darrenscoffee.com. Introducing Patrick Cockburn, Middle East correspondent for The Independent in Britain. That's independent.co.uk. And he's the author of a whole bunch of books, most recently, The Rise of Islamic State. Welcome back. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thanks.
Good. Really appreciate you joining us again on the show here.
Sorry about the delay.
Yeah, no problem at all. Very important piece that you wrote here at The Independent. The Arab Spring began in hope, but ended in desolation. And I remember well you advising us on the show back in 2011 that, well, this is possibly the start of something, but it's going to be a really tough road to hoe. And you really did a pretty good job of kind of taking us through, geographically speaking, kind of, through the Arab Spring and what the results have shaken up to be. And you say that there's at least one partial success that can be attributed to the Arab Spring revolutions. Is that right?
Yeah, Tunisia, there's still something surviving there, elections there. Everywhere else, it's not just sort of failed, but it's been a calamity, that Syria is torn apart by war, more than half the population are refugees or displaced, 250 million dead. Libya has broken up, is run by these sort of warlords and militias. Yemen, caught up in being attacked by Saudi Arabia, civil war. Bahrain, the Sunni monarchy crushed the rebellion very brutally. A lot of people tortured, and is now even more of a authoritarian state than it was in 2011 when this started. Bahrain has a Sunni monarchy, but a Shia majority. They're more oppressed than they were. And Egypt, of course, which was the most important country where you had what was described as Arab Spring, great hopes, Mubarak goes, but they never really took over the levers of power. And when there was an election, it was won by the Muslim Brotherhood. Eventually, the army comes back, and now is more authoritarian than ever before. So, disaster all round, with the possible exception of Tunisia.
Incredible. All right, well, so going back to Tunisia there, that's where it started when this young man, I forget his name now, I had learned it there for a while, set himself on fire in frustration over the regulators closing down his vegetable stand. And there had been, and actually we should mention Chelsea Manning and the role of the WikiLeaks revelations here in the run up to it, where in the fall of 2010, all these WikiLeaks cables came out and some of them described the corruption of the Ben Ali regime in such detail. And this had become a major controversy in the media in Tunisia in the weeks leading up to this man's self-immolation and then the riots that spread from there and the revolution. And, so, for people to go back and, try to remember how it was at that time. But so I guess I'd ask you if you could to give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch of how things have developed since then. I think I remember reading that the Islamists had won an election, but then they'd lost one and they stepped down from power and let the more left faction come to power, in, the kind of typical Western democratic way. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, this is the one place where the democratic change seemed to stick. Why did it work out that way? Or let's say, why did it not work out that way the other places? I think in most of these places, like Libya, Egypt, there was a certain wishful thinking, self-deception in the West about who was rising up. They were always more Islamist than they appeared on the television screens. There was always more of a civil war than people bore in mind, kept in mind. You know, things like Tahrir Square in Cairo were kind of designed for television. It was a very sort of media-friendly revolutions, and everybody talked about the great influence of the social media and so forth. But at the end of the day, you know, the army remained in power. Potentially in power. The newspapers, the television still remained under control of the old regime. And for about a year, they were intimidated by what had happened. But gradually, they realized that the uprising was very disparate, didn't really know what they were going to do. The Muslim Brotherhood. So it didn't really want to change the state. They wanted to take over the state. They wanted a kind of the same state, but this time it would be operating in a more Islamist way and under the direction of the Muslim Brotherhood. It didn't work. They're all in jail now.
Yeah, well, the ones who are still alive, right?
There was a great hypocrisy about this too, because who was supporting these uprisings, you know, in Libya and Syria were countries like Qatar, you know, were the Gulf monarchies. That's where the money was coming to pay the salaries for the rebel fighters. It was always absurd to think that you were going to have a secular democratic revolution in Syria that was somehow going to be supported and funded by countries that were absolute monarchies, not only absolute monarchies, but were theocratic. They had particularly regressive religious beliefs. So there was a great hypocrisy in the West of thinking, I think, that you could have a revolution with that sort of support behind. And of course, on the contrary, they backed the most Islamist and often the most jihadi groups who were trying to overthrow the state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, so in Libya, it seemed like, if you could contrast it with Bahrain, for example. In fact, I think David Gregory or one of these hacks asked Admiral Mike Mullen at the time, well, what's the difference between Libya, where we're helping the rebels overthrow the government, and Bahrain, where we're allied with the king who's crushing the rebellion? And Admiral Mullen said, well, Bahrain is our ally. In other words, hey, we stationed our fifth fleet there, so shrug.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it was. I think that even from their own self-interest, you know, the Western powers, the US, Britain, and the others, they thought, get rid of these people who've been opponents of our foreign policy, noticeably.
Oh, I'm sorry, Patrick, are you there? Yeah, you're cutting out on us. Well, we're going to break anyway. We'll be right back, y'all, with Patrick Cockburn. Hey, y'all, Scott here. First, I want to take a second to thank all the show's listeners, sponsors, and supporters for helping make the show what it is. I literally couldn't do it without you. And now I want to tell you about the newest way to help support the show. Whenever you shop at Amazon.com, stop by ScottHorton.org first, and just click the Amazon logo on the right side of the page. That way, the show will get a kickback from Amazon's end of the sale. It won't cost you an extra cent. And it's not just books. Amazon.com sells just about everything in the world, except cars, I think. So whatever you need, they've got it. Just click the Amazon logo on the right side of the page at ScottHorton.org, or go to ScottHorton.org/Amazon. Hey, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new book by Michael Swanson, The War State. In The War State, Swanson examines how Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy both expanded and fought to limit the rise of the new national security state after World War II. If this nation is ever to live up to its creed of liberty and prosperity for everyone, we are going to have to abolish the empire. Know your enemy. Get The War State by Michael Swanson. It's available at your local bookstore or at Amazon.com in Kindle or in paperback. Just click the book in the right margin at ScottHorton.org or thewarstate.com. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. It's my show, The Scott Horton Show. Well, if you got to have technical difficulties, right at the break is good timing for him, I say. We've got Patrick Cockburn on the telephone line now here. We're talking about the Arab Spring and this great piece that he wrote for The Independent. You can also find it at uns.com. The Arab Spring began in hope, but ended in desolation. And I guess at the break, we're talking about how America took the side of the king in Bahrain while they took the side of the revolution in Libya. And the reason why it had nothing to do with democracy or anything like that is just American national interest. Right, Patrick?
Because that's the way they looked at it. But, you know, when you
look what the outcome was. Was it in their interest that Libya eventually disintegrated after Gaddafi? That it's been self-deception to think that the anti-Gaddafi forces could take over. I think one thing to keep in mind I always keep in mind about Libya was that when the rebels, their transitional government turned up in Tripoli, and after the Gaddafi had been pushed out, their first proposal was the abolition of the laws banning polygamy.
Right, and awarding a medal to John McCain.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's the kind of guys they were, really. I mean, it's not just there were a lot of good people there, and as well, but that gave the sort of the flavor of what was happening. Now it's just, was this in the interest of the U.S. or anybody else? Well, certainly none of the Europeans, because now people from West Africa who used to work in Libya, they're all getting on leaky, sinking boats and trying to make it to Italy to try and emigrate to Europe. The same thing has happened in Syria. These countries are also the breeding ground of Islamic State. So, they kind of acted in what they imagined were their own best interest to get rid of governments that were sort of, I guess, opposed to their interests, but not very vigorously. And what they've got is a real disaster instead. One thing that strikes me about this is nobody sort of is blamed for it, Hillary Clinton is blamed, from what she did or did not do in Benghazi, but the overall disaster of American and European policy in Libya is very seldom brought up, so far as I know. Likewise in Syria. Likewise, people probably don't even know where Yemen is,
Right.
These have been disasters for the people there, but also disasters for the ripples for which reach Europe and eventually reach the United States.
Well, no end in sight either. And yeah, I mean, it is amazing. The narrative in America still, John McCain put out a statement today saying, basically shaming Obama for not doing more in Syria to get rid of Bashar al-Assad back years ago. And, there is no follow-up question, Patrick, that goes, well, Mr. Senator, but who would rule Damascus now? They don't have to think that far ahead. They just say, should have done more. That's all.
Yeah, well, I remember John McCain in 2007 in Baghdad walking down a street in front of the television cameras saying how U.S. had triumphed in Iraq, and here was this safe street which is perfectly safe without revealing that he's wearing body armor under his clothes, Of course, most Iraqis don't have the money to buy body armor. So there's a big element of hypocrisy in this.
Yeah. He was also surrounded by an entire battalion and Apache helicopters and everything else at the time, too. Put a Roman emperor to shame.
It's kind of banana. It's kind of really sort of crazy, this business of if we get rid of Assad, if we got rid of Assad then, the moderates would have taken over. What moderates? They were never there. Well, these believers in the Syrian moderates, the question to ask them is, if they believe in these guys, that they're very moderate and they're powerful and control Syria, why don't they go and visit them in Syria? And they never do. And the reason is, of course, they know they'd end up in the boot of a car pretty soon. And shortly afterwards, they'd be held hostage for money, and probably end up in jumpsuits having their heads chopped off, So it's very telling that the advocates of the Syrian moderates make very sure they don't, they'll interview them outside Syria, they'll talk to them on the phone and on Skype, but they don't actually visit these powerful people in Syria because they know it's funny.
Indeed. All right, now, so there was a little bit of an Arab Spring uprising in 2011 in the Shia part of I guess what you'd call the northeast of Saudi Arabia there, where most of the oil is. But I wonder, and I don't guess there was much of an uprising among the rest of the majority Sunni population there, or Wahhabi population, whatever it is. But no one ever really talks about this, Patrick. How stable do you think the Saudi kingdom is?
Well, there's an enormous change from then to now, which above all is the price of oil. We're looking now at what's the price of oil? It's about $31 now. Maybe we're looking at oil at $20 a barrel. And that's, what stabilizes Saudi Arabia and the oil states is they can pay everybody else. You don't have the money, you can't do that, you get destabilized. A place like Iraq. I remember a former minister telling me, the one time he'd seen the Iraqi cabinet panic was when the price of oil went down. But then it was going down to about $50. Now it's, down to $30. So there are people, there are chunks of the population just haven't received their salary. Up in Kurdistan, when I'm there, you get a taxi in Erbil, the capital. There's two things about the taxi drivers. One, they don't know where anything is. And secondly, that they're wearing, their trousers are military fatigue, they're camouflage. The reason is that they're soldiers who haven't been paid, who are trying to make some money driving a taxi to feed their families. Well, that's one of the reasons also they're appealing now to, that's why I think they executed Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, this Shia cleric, and they executed a lot of other people they're accused of being jihadis. I mean, since the court system is completely unfair, we don't know what they were, but did. But I think that revving up anti-Iranian, anti-Shia feeling among the Sunni majority in Saudi Arabia is partly to make people forget, that the week before these executions, they had an austerity budget that suddenly Saudis are having to pay more. Previously in these countries, you had a kind of social contract where the elite monopolized political power. There was no political liberty. They took a great deal of the money, but a certain amount went out in sort of government jobs and controlling prices and low prices for fuel, and you didn't pay for education. But when they don't have the money to pay that, then you have people begin to get really angry when they notice that what money there is being stolen by the elite.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting the way you say that in this article here, where, they can start to talk about, oh, yeah, let's have free market this or that. But in fact, they have a system that's so rigged that you start so-called privatizing the services at the very lowest level. What you're really doing is you have a system of patronage where the most of the people with the least are all being kicked off the dole, while the kings and their friends make even more than ever before. Very self-defeating policy over the long term there, sounds like.
This is one of the things that happened in Syria. It's not brought up very much, but, neoliberal economics. Originally, you had the Ba'ath Party under Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, and very authoritarian, very brutal. But, there was a sort of social contract that people, prices were controlled and low. It was very cheap to live there. People would get, a lot of things from the state. They get jobs from the state. You have neoliberal economics coming in a country where there's no accountability, where there's no, where the legal system is wholly corrupt. And this just becomes a license to plunder by those with political power, those around, those at the top.
Right. Well, and I guess we're out of time for this, but maybe I'll ask you one thing here real quick at the end. People say, and you may actually taught me this years ago too, actually, Patrick, now that I think about it, that the Turks shutting off I forget if it was the Tigris or the Euphrates. I guess the Euphrates, that they had built a new dam, and they were kind of putting all kinds of new pressure on the Iraqis and the Syrians as well. And then plus they had some drought. There's some who say, oh, global warming, this and that this is a big part of it, that everybody's farm went fallow, so they all moved to the cities, but they just moved to the ghettos. They have nothing to do except fight.
Yeah, I mean, you have that, but you have sort of people who arrived and lived in sort of slum areas of cities, and these, are ultimately the hardcore for the rebel opposition now. Also, the way it wasn't just global warming, but such water as there was often corrupt government officials would overexploit water, digging wells everywhere, would then sell on the water or use it on their own land. So, that's sort of, this type of free market economics, it's none too great in Europe or the U.S. It increases inequality. But in countries like Syria and Libya and other places like that, it put an unbearable pressure on the mass of the population.
Yep. All right. Well, it's been a pretty long and ugly 5 years, but as you say, there's a little bit of silver lining, at least there in Tunisia. And, I have to think that at least in Egypt, the lesson has been learned that when and if they get their act together, they can overthrow their military dictatorship. And that's, the biggest, most important country in the Middle East right there. It seemed like the lesson of 2011 can't be completely lost on them, the population of that country, just how much power they have when they act together. And
so, there's truth in that, but it's also true that the people who have power have also learned a lesson, which is anybody gets out of line, you torture them or you shoot them or you put them in prison.
Yeah.
When there are local or student elections and suddenly people who are against the status quo got elected, they just, immediately closed it down. So, lessons have been learned, but they've been learned by those who hold power as well as those who don't.
Right. Yeah, and of course all the Muslim Brotherhood guys have learned the lesson that, geez, I guess Zawahiri was right and we just have to fight after all instead of standing for election, because why bother?
We'll look at it that way. And of course, to set them out of that is in the interests of the president, of Sisi, of the present holders of power, because they want to say we're under threat from these fellows,
Right.
But this is also a sort of tremendously impoverished country. Half the population living at $1, maybe $2 a day. They'll be getting money from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. But, as we were saying, those countries don't have much money, don't have the kind of money now that they had previously. Saudi Arabia, to pay all its bills, needs the price of oil, I think, at $104 a barrel. It's $30 a barrel. They got reserves, but they're going down.
Right. All right. Well, I've kept you over time here, Patrick. Sorry about that. I'll let you go now, but I sure do appreciate all your work on this and coming on my show all the time the way you do.
As always.
All right, y'all. That is the great Patrick Cockburn from The Independent. The book is Rise of Islamic State. Read it and check out all his great articles at independent.co.uk and uns.com. That's UNZ, uns.com. And we'll see y'all tomorrow.
Hey, y'all. Scott Horton here. It's always safe to say that one should keep at least some of your savings in precious metals as a hedge against inflation. And if this economy ever does heat back up and the banks start expanding credit, rising prices could make metals a very profitable bet. Since 1977, Robertson Roberts Brokerage Inc. has been helping people buy and sell gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, and they do it well. They're fast, reliable, and trusted for more than 35 years. And they take Bitcoin. Call Robertson Roberts at 1-800-874-9760 or stop by rrbi.co. Hey, I'll check out the audiobook of Lou Rockwell's Fascism versus Capitalism, narrated by me, Scott Horton, at audible.com. It's a great collection of his essays and speeches on the important tradition of liberty. From medieval history to the Ron Paul Revolution, Rockwell blasts our status enemies, profiles our greatest libertarian heroes, and prescribes the path forward in the battle against Leviathan. Fascism versus Capitalism by Lou Rockwell for audiobook. Find it at Audible, Amazon, iTunes, or just click in the right margin of my website at scotthorton.org. Hey, Scott Horton here for MPV Engineering. This isn't for all of you, but for high-end contractors specializing in industrial construction and end users who own and operate industrial equipment. MPV offers licensed professional consulting on chemical and mechanical engineering for your projects. Tanks, pressure vessels, piping, heat exchangers, HVAC equipment, chemical reactors for oil companies or manufacturing facilities, as well as project management support and troubleshooting for those implementing designs. MPV will get your industrial project up and running. Head over to mpvengineering.com.